The check hit the counter so hard it nearly tore. "I need this cashed. Today." Denise Marshall's voice was calm, but her hand was not. It trembled slightly as she slid the paper across the marble counter, watching it spin once before settling in front of the teller. The teller, a young man barely out of his 20s, glanced down at the amount, then up at Denise, then back down again, as if the zeros might rearrange themselves into something he could believe. $250,000, he said slowly. "That's what it says." Denise kept her tone even. She'd learned a long time ago that the moment you let your voice crack, people stopped listening to your words and started listening to your tone instead. The teller's eyes flicked toward the glass-walled office at the back of the bank. Let me just get my manager." "Of course," Denise said. "I figured you might." She didn't know yet how many times she'd have to say that sentence before the day was over. Vincent Hale emerged from his office like a man who had been waiting all morning for an excuse to leave it. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a smile that never once reached his eyes. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, though his eyes were already on Denise, already cataloging her. The simple cotton dress, the worn handbag, the absence of jewelry, and drawing conclusions he wouldn't admit to out loud. "No issue," Denise said. "I'd like to cash this check." Vincent picked it up between two fingers, the way someone might lift a piece of trash they didn't want touching their skin. He studied it for a long moment. "This is a cashier's check for $250,000, he said. "Yes." "Made out to you?" "Yes." "From an escrow account." He set it back down, sliding it half an inch away from her, like he was returning something he suspected was counterfeit. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some additional identification and documentation explaining the source of these funds." Denise reached into her purse without hesitation, pulling out her driver's license, a folder of paperwork already organized in plastic sleeves, closing documents, attorney letters, a notarized settlement agreement. She'd learned over the years to come prepared for moments exactly like this one. "This is the settlement for my husband's wrongful death case," she said, placing the folder on the counter and opening it to the first page. "He died on a construction site 2 years ago. The company finally settled last month. Everything is documented. Attorney's name and number are right there if you need to verify." Vincent barely glanced at the folder. "I'll need to verify this with my branch director." "You are the branch director." "With my regional director, then." He picked up the check again, turned, and walked back toward his office without another word, leaving Denise standing at the counter, the folder of documents open and untouched, the eyes of 3 other customers now drifting toward her. The young teller shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, glancing at her, then at the office door, then back at his screen. "I'm sorry," he murmured, almost too quiet to hear. "He does this sometimes. With certain checks." "Certain checks," Denise repeated. "Or certain people?" The teller didn't answer. He didn't have to. She waited. 11 minutes, standing at a counter in a bank lobby with marble floors and soft instrumental music piped through hidden speakers, while a man who had glanced at her documentation for less than 10 seconds decided that 10 seconds wasn't enough to be sure. A woman 2 windows down finished her transaction in under 90 seconds. A deposit slip, a driver's license, a quick smile from her teller, and she was gone, purse swinging at her side, never once asked to prove the money she was depositing actually belonged to her. Denise watched her leave and said nothing. There would be time for words later. Right now, there was only waiting. When Vincent returned, his expression had shifted from suspicious to something closer to satisfied, as if he'd confirmed something he already believed. "I'm sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all, "but we can't process this today. There are some irregularities." "What irregularities?" "The amount is unusually large for an account with your transaction history." He said it like he was reciting a script which, in a sense, he was just not the script he thought he was reading. "We have policies in place to protect against fraud. I'm not asking you to deposit it into a new account I just opened," Denise said, keeping her voice level, though something hot was beginning to climb up the back of her neck. "I'm asking you to cash a certified check from an escrow account tied to a court settlement." This is exactly the kind of transaction your bank processes every single day. For some customers, perhaps. The sentence hung in the air between them, and everyone within 10 feet of the counter understood exactly what it meant, even if Vincent hadn't said the words directly. Denise's jaw tightened. Say what you mean. I'm simply saying, Vincent said, folding his hands on the counter, that large transactions require a level of scrutiny that protects the bank and, frankly, protects people in situations like yours from being taken advantage of. Situations like mine. Single mothers, inheritance windfalls, settlement money. He shrugged, as though listing categories from a textbook rather than describing a human being standing 4 feet in front of him. We see fraud target these situations constantly. I am not being defrauded, Mr. Hale, Denise said, reading his nameplate now, committing it to memory. I buried my husband. I raised 2 children alone for 2 years while lawyers fought over a settlement that should have come months sooner. This check is the only thing that man's death bought our family, and I would like to deposit it without being interrogated like a criminal. A small crowd had gathered now, not deliberately, but the way crowds gather anywhere tension builds, drawn by something instinctual that recognizes conflict before the mind catches up. I understand you're upset, Vincent said, in the tone people use when they want credit for patience they aren't actually extending, but I have a responsibility to this institution. You have a responsibility to your customers. Some customers require more verification than others. And which customers would those be? Denise's voice had risen now, enough that the words carried across the lobby. Vincent's mouth tightened. I think you know exactly what I mean. I'd like you to say it.
He didn't say it.
Instead, he slid the check back toward her, not handing it to her, just sliding it, the way you'd return something contaminated. Come back tomorrow with additional documentation. Tax returns. A letter from your attorney's firm on official letterhead, not just a printed copy. We'll see where we are then. I gave you a notarized settlement agreement. It's not sufficient. It is sufficient. You simply don't want it to be. Vincent's smile thinned into something colder. I don't have to explain bank policy to you. No, Denise said quietly, picking the check back up, her hand steadier now than it had been when she walked in, anger settling into something more useful than trembling. But you'll have to explain it to someone eventually. She left without another word, the folder of documents tucked under her arm, the eyes of the lobby following her all the way to the door. She came back the next day with everything he'd asked for. Tax returns. A letter from the law firm on letterhead, so official it bore an embossed gold seal. A second, notarized copy of the settlement agreement. A printed statement from the escrow company confirming the funds had cleared 3 weeks earlier. Vincent reviewed it for exactly 90 seconds before sliding it all back across the counter. This still isn't quite what we need, he said. You told me yesterday this would be enough. Policies change. We have to be thorough. Mr. Hale. Denise's voice had dropped into something low and dangerous, the calm of a woman who had run out of patience, but refused to let it show as anything other than precision. I am going to ask you a direct question, and I would like a direct answer. Is there a problem with my documentation, or is there a problem with me? Vincent's eyes flicked toward the small crowd that had begun gathering again, drawn by the rising tension the way moths are drawn to anything that flickers. He straightened his jacket. I don't appreciate the implication. I haven't implied anything. I've asked you a question. The implication, Vincent said, his voice rising now too, the performance shifting into something uglier, is that I'm targeting you because of your race, and frankly, that's offensive. I treat every customer who walks through this door according to the exact same standard. Then perhaps you should explain why the man ahead of me yesterday deposited a check for $40,000 with nothing but his driver's license, and I'm being asked for tax returns and notarized letters to deposit a court-ordered settlement check. Several people in the lobby exchanged glances. One woman near the entrance had quietly taken out her phone. That's not a fair comparison, Vincent snapped. Why not? Because he stopped himself, recalibrating, choosing his next words with visible effort. Because every transaction is evaluated on its own merits. On its own merits, Denise repeated. Mine has more merit than most. I have more documentation than most people who walk through this door. And still, somehow, it's never enough. I think you need to lower your voice. I think you need to do your job. Ma'am, I am trying to do my job. My job includes protecting this institution from liability. Your job also includes serving the people who bank here, Denise shot back. Or, has that stopped applying to me specifically? Nobody said it stopped applying to you. Then explain to me, in plain language, what exactly is missing from what I've given you. Not irregularities. Not policy. Tell me the specific document you need, and I will bring it tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until you run out of excuses. Vincent's mouth opened, then closed. There was no specific document. There never had been. I'll have to consult with compliance, he said finally. You said that yesterday, too. Compliance reviews take time. My husband's been dead for 2 years, Mr. Hale. I have had nothing but time. What I don't have anymore is patience. The exchange had drawn nearly a dozen onlookers now, some pretending to wait in line, others simply standing and watching, the particular electricity of public conflict holding the room in place. Ma'am, Vincent said, his composure cracking at the edges, I'm going to need you to step aside so I can help other customers. I am a customer. You're being disruptive. I raised my voice once, after you accused me of trying to defraud your bank with documentation more thorough than anyone else who's walked through that door today. Denise's hands were shaking again now, but this time it wasn't fear. I think the disruption started with you. Vincent's face had gone red, cornered now, the crowd's attention pressing against him from every direction. He glanced toward his office, as if considering retreat, then seemed to decide against it, as if backing down now, in front of witnesses, would cost him something he valued more than this conversation already had. You think this is easy for me, he said, his voice tight. You think I enjoy standing here being accused of something ugly because I'm being careful with the bank's money? It's not the bank's money, Denise said. It's mine. It was court-ordered. It was settled. The only thing standing between me and that money right now is you. Maybe if you weren't so combative about it. I wasn't combative on day one, Mr. Hale. I wasn't combative yesterday. I have been patient through 3 visits and 2 days of being treated like a suspect in my own life. The only thing that's changed today is that I finally said it out loud. Well, maybe that's the problem, Vincent snapped, his composure cracking further. Maybe if people came in here with a little more humility about what they're asking for. Humility, Denise repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. You want humility from a widow asking to access money a court already decided belongs to her. And then, in the silence that followed, frustration finally broke through whatever thin restraint had been holding his composure together. You people always have an excuse, he muttered, not quite under his breath, but not quite loud either, the kind of comment designed to be deniable later. Coming in here acting entitled to money you probably don't even understand how to manage. You're lucky I haven't called security on you already, you. He stopped himself, but not soon enough. Finish the sentence. Denise said, her voice deathly calm now, the calm of someone who has just been handed exactly the rope they needed. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I said you're acting like a stray dog, sniffing around for money that isn't yours. Vincent snapped, his composure fully gone now. The mask dropped entirely. Is that what you wanted to hear? The lobby went silent. Absolutely, completely silent, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on a room and makes the air feel thick. Denise didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. She turned, picked up her folder of documents, and walked toward the door without another word, leaving Vincent standing at the counter in front of a dozen witnesses, the silence around him deafening, the words he'd just said hanging in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. He told himself, walking back to his office, that he'd won something, that he'd put her in her place, that tomorrow would be just another day. He had no idea what was coming. Denise didn't go home that night. She went to her sister's apartment 3 blocks away, where Jacqueline Marshall, formerly Jacqueline Reyes, before she married into the family 15 years ago and never looked back at her maiden name, was already setting the table for dinner when Denise walked in, her face still tight with something Jacqueline recognized immediately. What happened? Denise told her. All of it. The first refusal, the second, the documentation, the comparison to the man with $40,000, and finally, the words that had landed in front of a dozen strangers like a verdict nobody asked for. Jacqueline set down the plate. She was holding very slowly, very deliberately, the way people do when they're trying not to break something out of sheer rage. He called you a stray dog. In front of everyone. And you didn't say anything back? I said exactly what I needed to say. Denise sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I said yes, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. And then I left. Jacqueline's eyes had gone hard, calculating, the particular expression she wore at depositions, in courtrooms, in conference rooms full of men who underestimated her right up until the moment they couldn't anymore. Jacqueline Marshall was a civil rights attorney, 11 years into a career built on cases exactly like this one, discrimination dressed up as policy, bias laundered through bureaucratic language until it sounded almost reasonable. Denise, she said slowly, tell me again, word for word, what he said. Everything. Don't leave anything out. Denise repeated it all again. The irregularities, the people like you, the stray dog, and Jacqueline wrote every word down on a legal pad with the focused intensity of someone building a case in real time. Was anyone recording? I saw at least one woman with her phone out. Do you know her name?
No.
We'll find her, Jacqueline said, already reaching for her own phone. Banks have surveillance audio in most branches now, especially at the teller counters, for liability reasons. If there's even a partial recording, we can subpoena the rest. Jackie, I don't want to make this into some big lawsuit. I just want my money. You're going to get your money, Jacqueline said, her voice firm, certain. But you're also going to get an apology, and that bank is going to understand exactly what it cost them when an employee calls a grieving widow a stray dog in front of witnesses, on the same day they were trying to deny her a legally settled claim. I don't have the energy for a fight right now. Then let me carry it for you, Jacqueline said, reaching across the table and taking her sister's hand. You've carried enough. You buried your husband. You fought a corporation for 2 years to get what they owed you. You don't have to fight this one alone. Denise's eyes filled, finally, after 2 days of holding herself together through sheer force of will. He called me a stray dog, Jackie. I know. Like I was nothing. Like the money wasn't even mine to begin with. I know, Jacqueline said again, softer this time. And he is about to learn exactly how wrong he was. She picked up her phone right there at the kitchen table and called one of her paralegals, her voice shifting instantly from comforting sister to methodical attorney. I need a records request drafted tonight for First Heritage Bank's downtown branch, surveillance footage, audio logs if they have them, and a list of every customer transaction processed at that counter for the past 3 days. I also need you to pull the OCC complaint forms and start drafting language tonight. We're filing first thing tomorrow morning, before they have time to coordinate a response. She hung up and looked back at her sister. Tomorrow, you're not walking in there alone. Tomorrow, you're walking in there with me. What if he just lies? What if he says he never said it? Then we let the witnesses speak. There were at least a dozen people in that lobby, Denise. People remember cruelty. They remember it especially when it's dressed up as policy and then slips and shows its real face. Jacqueline squeezed her hand once more. He showed his face today. We're going to make sure everyone sees it. Denise nodded slowly, wiping her eyes, something in her chest unclenching just slightly for the first time in 2 days. Okay. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Jackie. Yeah. Thank you. For believing me without making me prove it first. Jacqueline's expression softened. You never have to prove anything to me, Denise. Not ever. The next morning, Jacqueline walked into First Heritage Bank wearing a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a leather portfolio, and trailing 2 associates from her firm, one of whom was already recording audio on a device clipped discreetly to her jacket. Denise walked beside her, chin lifted, the same folder of documents tucked under her arm, though this time, she wasn't carrying it alone. Vincent Hale looked up from his desk and felt something cold settle in his stomach the moment he saw them approaching. "Mr. Hale," Jacqueline said, extending a hand he didn't take fast enough before she'd already withdrawn it and opened her portfolio instead. "I'm Jacqueline Marshall. I'm an attorney representing Denise Marshall, my sister, who you refused to serve yesterday and the day before, despite complete and verified." "Mr. Hale," Jacqueline said, extending a hand he didn't take fast enough before she'd already withdrawn it and opened her portfolio instead. "I'm Jacqueline Marshall. I'm an attorney representing Denise Marshall, my sister, who you refused to serve yesterday and the day before, despite complete and verified documentation for a $250,000 settlement check." 8 million views within the first 10 days. Comment sections filled with stories from other people who recognized the same pattern: documentation that was never enough, scrutiny that arrived dressed as policy, the particular exhaustion of being treated as a suspect in your own financial life. One commenter, a woman from Atlanta, wrote that she'd experienced something nearly identical 2 years earlier with an insurance settlement, except no one had been recording, and she'd simply gone home and cried in her car instead of fighting it. Another, a man in Detroit, described being asked for 3 forms of identification to cash his own paycheck, while a white coworker standing beside him cashed the same employer's check with a glance and a smile. The stories piled up beneath the video by the hundreds, then the thousands, each one small on its own, devastating in aggregate. A national news segment picked up the story a week later, inviting Jacqueline on as a guest to discuss what she called the quiet architecture of financial discrimination, the way bias rarely announced itself anymore, choosing instead to hide inside words like irregularities and additional verification and policy until something cracked the surface and showed what had been underneath the entire time. First Heritage Bank issued a public apology within 48 hours of the story breaking, along with an announcement that they would be conducting mandatory bias training across all branches and establishing a new oversight committee for large transaction disputes. Denise didn't know whether to believe the announcement was sincere or simply damage control. She suspected, honestly, that it was both, and that both could be true at the same time. Vincent Hale tried, once, to reach her directly, a handwritten letter delivered to her home address, apologizing, asking for understanding, explaining that he'd been raised differently and didn't recognize until it was too late how deeply his assumptions had shaped the way he treated people. Denise read it twice, then placed it in a drawer she never opened again. She didn't owe him forgiveness. She'd given him every chance to do his job correctly, 3 separate times, before the truth had come out of his mouth on its own. 3 months later, Denise used part of the settlement to open a small bakery 2 blocks from where her husband used to drop their kids off at school every morning before his shift, a business he talked about helping her start someday, in the easy, hopeful way people talk about some days before they understand how little time they actually have. She named it Callaway's after him. On opening day, Jacqueline stood beside her at the counter, the same counter style Denise had insisted on building herself, marble-topped, deliberately reminiscent of the one she'd stood at 3 months earlier, while a man decided her humanity based on the size of a check. "You know what's funny?" Denise said, watching the first customers trickle through the door. "I used to think the worst thing that could happen to me already happened when Callaway died. Then I thought it happened again, standing in that bank, listening to a stranger decide what I deserved. And now I think the worst thing already happened, and everything after that was just me proving it didn't get to define me." Denise wiped down the counter, glancing at the framed photo near the register, her husband, smiling, captured at a barbecue 2 summers before the accident that took him. "He'd have liked this place. He'd have loved this place," Jacqueline corrected. "And he'd have been furious about what that man said to you. Callaway never let anyone disrespect you. Not once. Not in 15 years. "No," Denise agreed, smiling for the first time in what felt like months. "He never did. I figured it was time I started doing the same for myself." Later that evening, after the last customers had gone and the closed sign hung in the window, Denise sat at one of the small cafe tables with her 2 children, 8-year-old Marcus and 11-year-old Imani, going over the day's receipts more out of habit than necessity. "Mom," Imani said, looking up from her homework. Aunt Jackie told me what that man said to you. At the bank. Denise set down her pen. She'd hoped to shield her children from the worst of it, but children always seemed to find their way to the truth eventually, no matter how carefully adults tried to manage it. He was wrong, Denise said simply. And he found out he was wrong, in front of a lot of people. Were you scared? Marcus asked. A little, but being scared and being right aren't opposites, baby. Sometimes you have to be both at the same time. Aunt Jackie said you didn't even yell at him. She said you just looked at him and let him finish saying the worst thing he could possibly say because you knew it would matter more coming out of his mouth than yours. Denise smiled faintly. Your aunt give you the whole legal strategy breakdown? She said it was a masterclass. Imani said, deadly serious, the way only an 11-year-old repeating adult vocabulary can be. Well, Denise said, pulling both her children into a hug that smelled like flour and cinnamon and the particular exhaustion of a good day's work, I hope neither one of you ever has to go through something like that. But if you do, I want you to remember this. You don't have to be loud to be heard. Sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that ends up being remembered longest. She thought of Calloway then, the way she did most evenings when the bakery finally quieted down, his laugh, his patience, the particular way he used to tell her she was the strongest person he'd ever met, long before she'd ever needed to prove it to a stranger across a marble counter. She liked to think he would have been proud of how she'd handled it. Not because she'd won, exactly, but because she'd refused to let someone else's cruelty become the last word in her story. It wasn't the last word. It was barely a footnote. In the end, a man's bad afternoon, swallowed up by everything that came after it. Her bakery, her children's homework spread across a cafe, her sister's voice on the phone every evening, checking in, the two of them laughing more easily now than they had in years. The check had been cashed months ago. The money had built something real. But what Denise carried forward, more than the money, was the simple fact that she'd stood her ground 3 times before anyone else stood beside her, and that when help finally came, she hadn't needed saving so much as backup, someone to stand next to her while the truth she'd already spoken out loud finally got the hearing it deserved. If this story moved you, take a second right now and hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find stories like Denise's. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been treated like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? I read every single one of them. And if you want more stories like this, quiet dignity standing up against loud injustice, the kind of justice that doesn't come loud but comes complete, subscribe and turn on notifications because there's a lot more coming and you will not want to miss what happens next. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply stay standing, stay calm, and let the truth do what it always eventually does. Come back around, in full, to the person who tried to deny it.